So what we're going to do today, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the Zip-up Cardholder pattern, but this is how this pattern looks like. So we have two slip pockets here. These are for your cards. Then we have kind of like a larger slip pocket on the back and just a simple zipper pouch inside. So it's pretty straightforward project. It's pretty quick to make as well. It's one of my favorite patterns whenever I kind of lose my sojo and I want to sew something, but I want to make sure that I finish it in one setting. Typically, I will go for this pattern. And as often as I make it, usually I would give them to my family and friends because I don't need so many zipper pockets as zipper pouches. And I received so many like requests from my family, friends, and also from you guys online asking how you can add some sort of connector to hold your cards in place. So I forgot to prepare my card, so bear with me a second. So here I have an example of a card that you would use. So it's the same size as your credit or debit card, bank card, or whatever card you have in your wallet. So what I get is requests, oh, I'm a little bit scared that my cards will fall out of the wallet. Even though it's quite tight, it shouldn't fall out. So if I shake it, you don't really, it may fall out, but usually it doesn't. But I understand the worry. So I thought how cool it would be, instead of making a completely new pattern, how cool it would be to show you how to do it yourself, how to amend the pattern. So that's what we're going to do. This is such a simple modification to the pattern that you will be so surprised. And you can use those modifications that we're going to do today on other patterns. So if you have wallets or other patterns from other designers that are very similar in a sense that they have like a card slots and a little slip pocket, you can definitely use this tutorial for those patterns as well. So this is what we're going to do on the front, and on the back the original pattern has slip pocket. So we are going to leave this slip pocket. What I've done is I made my pocket taller because this pocket is not as tall as I wanted to with the flap. I think it looks nicer where the pocket is slightly taller and then you have that flap. I think the proportions are pretty nice. So this is what we're going to do. If you don't want to extend the pocket, you don't have to. That is totally up to you. I will walk you through all the modifications and what you can do, what you can choose, how high, how long, and all that stuff. I will try to walk you through each step. So that's basically it. That's all we're going to do today. So hopefully this live won't be 3 hours long, but we shall see. So I hope you are ready, because I'm going to start. So grab your pattern pieces, and what we're going to do is we're going to put away the patterns that we don't need. So we don't need the side panel, we don't need zipper tab, and we don't need the front and back lining. Those three ones, you can put them aside, we don't need them. So I'm going to put them aside. Slip pocket, you can keep the slip pocket if you want, if you are not going to change the height. If like me, you're going to change the height, then you can put it aside, because what I like to do is to just draft myself a new pattern piece. Otherwise you will have to extend it. So I just prefer to draft the entire piece from the start. So I'm going to put it aside. So we only have technically 2 pattern pieces, that we're going to work on. And we're going to create 2 new pattern pieces, and like 2 completely new pattern pieces. And then we're going to kind of cut those ones in 2 parts. So we're going to have more pattern pieces by the end of this tutorial. So let's begin. I'm going to put one of those papers aside because I don't need 2 of them. So first we're going to work on the connector. So what we need to do is divide this pattern into 2 sections, because we want to stitch that connector between. Otherwise you would have either raw edges, or you would have to like top stitch the connector on top around here, which I quite like. I don't like it. You know, I know it might be a simple solution, but I like to have my edges hidden, and I like, you know, to have it nice and neat. And I didn't want to stitch it into the zipper because then it would be like a little bulky around here. And the same thing on the flap. I could technically extend the entire flap up to the zipper and stitch it there, but we all know how horrible it is when there's lots of bulk around the zipper, especially when you need to do that last top stitching. So these are the reasons why I've chosen to construct those pieces the way I've done them. Just as a side note, because you may like it to the top. It's up to you. So first, what you're going to do, take your ruler and a pen or pencil. So I'm going to grab my pen. And what you're going to do is to fold your card slot pattern piece. So here are those lines, and you need to basically fold them to create your card slots. I already folded them previously, so it is much easier for me. But basically what you want to do is to follow those lines. So the first one, you need to fold it like this. Then on the second one, you need to fold it like this, and so on. I'm sure you are familiar with how to construct slip pockets for your cards. So once you've got this folded like this, this will give you an like a rule where you need to cut the top piece. So what I wanted is to have this part here not visible. So the seam that joins that top panel, the black fabric here, and the rest of my slip pockets, I didn't want that seam to be visible from the outside. So you will have to fold that. And here, I'm not sure if you can see, is that fold the second pocket. So here is that second pocket. So basically what I do is I mark the edge. So now I will know exactly where is that seam. So here is that seam where I have my connector and the top panel and the slip pocket joined. So, so this here is the edge of my slip pocket. What you can do is drop this seam slightly lower, just in case if you don't fold your fabric properly. Sometimes if we cut the fabric a little bit wonky or not like very precisely, sometimes when you fold your fabric, it folds a little bit different depending on the thickness of your fabric. So what you can do is to drop that seam a little bit lower, so when you fold it and you see it, you know for sure that seam is not visible. So this is just a side note. For the purpose of this lesson, I'm just going to keep this seam as it is. So once you decide where you want that seam to be, so either here or slightly lower, just in case, you know, to prevent it from peeking out, then you can cut your pattern piece along this line, and then we're going to have two separate pattern pieces. But before we do that, what I like to do is to find my midpoints, because this pattern doesn't have midpoints. So I'm just going to simply fold my, I'm going to move this aside so you can see, I'm going to just fold my pattern in half and just crease it. There you go. So I'm going to mark it with my pencil so then later I can erase it. So here is that center line, and here is that center line. So this will be important because once you make your patterns, you want to make sure that your connector is centered. So later we need to find the placement of the snap, and obviously when you are sewing your pattern you want to have those midpoints so you can know exactly where to place that connector. So that's the reason why we are doing it. So now we need to find out and figure out how long this connector needs to be, because at the moment we don't know that. So what I do is I first mark the placement of my connector. So when I look at my wallet, here is the top pocket, the top edge of the pocket, and this is that top edge here. So this is basically how your front looks like, and you can decide how far from that top edge of this pocket here, how far or how low you want that connector to be. You can make it like me, or you can make it much lower, or you can make it a little bit higher if there is a space. This is totally up to you, but this will determine how long your connector will be, because if you are going to place it longer, like lower, you will have to have a longer connector. If you're going to place it higher, your connector is going to be shorter. So that's the reason why we are doing it. So let's see, I can't remember how much I put it. I think it was like about 2 centimeters. So I believe that's about 3/4 of an inch, but don't quote me on that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to measure 2 centimeters. So we have 1 and 2 centimeters from the top edge of that pocket, and I'm going to make a little line. So here, this X indicates the placement of my snap. So you can use press snaps or magnetic snaps or whatever closure you prefer. I like to use press snaps for this type of connector. So when you have this figured out, now we can start measuring how long our connector is going to be. And what I like to do is to take my card and place it on top, because obviously if I show you on this already one, as you can see, my connector goes up and then goes behind the pocket. That's why, because if I put my card here, my card is picking out. It doesn't end with the wallet. So we want to make sure this connector is long enough to go around the card and then goes down to our snap. So that's why keep your card on hand when you are modifying the pattern. So what you can do now is to measure it. So I'm just going to mark the top edge of my card just for later. I will show you why. So I'm going to measure from the top of my card to the placement of that connector. So it is nearly 5 centimeters. So I'm going to round it up to 5 centimeters, which is close to 2 inches. And then remember, you need to add extra bit because it goes behind the card up to this line. So that's why I marked the edge of my card, because we need to add this distance as well. So since we had 5 centimeters there, and here is about 1 centimeter, that's 3/8 of an inch. In total, that's 6 centimeters for me. So I'm just going to write this 6 centimeters connector, because I have a very poor memory. Okay, so once we have that, we can start drafting our pattern. But as a side note, what I want to let you know from personal experience and from like trial and error over the years is that whenever you are modifying patterns like this, excuse me, you need to account for the fabric, because paper folds nice and thin and flat, but our fabric, as you know, is not as thin as the paper, especially if you use some stabilizers or if you are using very, very thick materials. So what I like to do is to add extra bit of ease to accommodate that. And then when I'm assembling the pouch, I can always check with my card, see if I where I need to place that connector. You can always put it lower or higher. So this is what I usually do. Let me just, something just popped out on my screen. So let me know if so far this makes sense. I know it's a lot of information, but I want to make sure you understand why we're doing things, so you can replicate that later on. So I'm going to add 1 centimeter of ease. So my connector is 7 centimeters long in height to the point of the snap, the center of the snap. Obviously the connector will be longer because there is more fabric, so keep that in mind as well. So what I like to do now is to draw my connector. So you can take pen, ruler, and at this point you can decide how wide you want your connector. Do you want it really narrow or do you want it really wide? This is totally up to you. I'm just going to draw a rectangle. So let me just draw a random rectangle. So I'm going to make my connector about 2 centimeters wide. So that's, I think, 3/4 of an inch. So this is my connector. And since I want the corners, like the bottom, to be nice and rounded, what you can do is to round that edge. Again, if you have like a rounded object in your house, you can use it. You can freehand that. I'm just going to freehand one side like this. That's where the magic tracing paper comes in. So I can just cut small portion. You can always fold your paper in half, and then if you see it through, you can trace it this way as well. But I want to show you like different options as well. So now I can just trace this. I would cut it. And then I would use this on the other side. There you go. So obviously I'm doing it pretty quickly, so it is a little bit messy, and I'm using pen. So this is the curve of my connector. So now I want to make sure that I have the center marked because we need to mark the placement of our snap. So that's, for me, that's here, that's the center, and you need to decide where you want that snap to be. So this may depend on the size of your snap, but my snap is about, I think, half an inch or so, 12 millimeters. So I can measure about 1.5 centimeters. That's, I think, 5/8 of an inch. So this is my connector, my snap placement. So from this point, we know now that we wanted our connector to be 7 centimeters long. So I can now take my ruler and from this point measure 7 centimeters up. Here you go. So that's that. Every time when you draw something, make sure you square your edges so everything is nice and straight, unless you're going for like a curvy edge, that's fine. So here, this is the finished size of my connector. So to complete this as a pattern, we need to add seam allowance. So you can take your ruler and simply add required seam allowance. I typically add like a 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch seam. You can do whatever the pattern says. So if you already, if you are using someone else's pattern, and let's say they are using 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, then you can carry on using the same seam allowance so you don't get confused later on. And I'm just going to quickly draw that, which is not going to be pretty, but this is how you can add seam allowance around the curves using just a straight ruler. So what you need to do is to keep the consistent seam allowance and pivot your ruler around the curve and make tiny lines. And this will give you a nice precise seam allowance. So here you go. Usually I would make this nice and neat with a pencil and eraser, but since I cannot do it today, I'll leave it as it is. So this is the first pattern piece completed. So what you want to do is to name it. You can draw grain line so you know how to cut it, especially if you are using directional print fabric. And you can put, I don't know, snap connector. And we want to cut it 2 times. So the way it is constructed, it is cut twice, right sides together, you sew it, turn it, and then you top stitch around. Exactly the same way you would stitch normal strap. So cut 2 times external fabric. Here you go. So this is my complete pattern piece. So now you can just cut it out, which I'm not going to bother because I don't want to waste your time. So you would just cut it out. I'm going to put this aside for now. So once you have this pattern piece ready, you can finish working on your front panel. So what you need to do is now is to cut your pattern piece along this line, like I mentioned earlier on, and we're going to add seam allowance. So I'm going to just cut it just like that. Make sure you don't lose this piece, and again, make sure you mark it. So you want to label it. So here is our grain line. You want to make sure you copy it to this pattern as well, so you know exactly how to cut it, so you don't cut it like this by accident. So I'll just extend this line here, and I just draw a little arrow just like that, and we can label it. So let's call it front top or something like this. This is totally up to you how you're going to call it. And we need to cut one time, because it's only one piece here, and I like to cut it from external fabric. If like me, you can use accent fabric, or you can use the same fabric you've done on your card slots, so it looks like this. The whole panel would be nice from the same fabric. So next we need to add seam allowance to where we cut our pattern piece, because remember, there is a seam and we need that seam allowance to stitch it. So what I typically do is take my paper, take my glue. So if you have a glue or sellotape, just use it. I'll just glue the back of my pattern piece, and I can simply glue it on top. I don't have enough space, so I'll do it separately. So now, I'm not sure if you can see, here is the edge of that paper. So we're going to add seam allowance. Again, I'm going to stick to the same seam allowance, so that's 1 centimeter for me. That might be I can't speak anymore. That might be different for you. So you want to strengthen the side edges because you want to extend the sides. And this is our pattern. So now go ahead and cut it out. All right, so that's that. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing for this piece. So again, I'm just going to put some glue on the back. And glue it on top. And we're going to add that seam allowance. So again, here is the edge of the paper, and I'm going to add 1 centimeter seam allowance. Here we go. And square these sides, just like that. And we can cut it out. There we go. So here are our pattern pieces. So this is the front, including that connector. This is all the modification we need to do for the front. So next we're going to work on the back. So those pieces are finished. We can put them aside. We don't need them. All right, next we're going to take the back pattern piece. So let me just take those pieces, small ones, aside. Let me have a look. Any comments? I love the glue hint. That's great. Let me know if you have any questions, if I'm going too fast or too slow. I always like to give you as much information as possible, so that's why. Okay, so next, like I said, we're going to work on the back, and this is a very similar concept to the front, meaning that this is the original pattern for the back. So let me see. So this is this pattern here, all this, that's the back pattern piece. And what we want to do is to, again, slice it and insert the flap. So if you look, here is the seam. So I'm not sure if you can see because I use the same fabric, but here this black line is the top stitching. So the concept is very, very similar to what we've done earlier on. So hopefully this will make more sense and kind of make you understand everything easier. So here is the thing. Let me just put that glue aside so it doesn't dry. So here is the thing. When I mentioned earlier on The original slip pocket is slightly shorter than what I wanted to achieve. So I think so. I think I extended it by 1 or 1.5 centimeters. I'm not sure exactly. But what we can do, or what you can do, is to decide how far you want that slip pocket to be. Remember, there is a seam allowance here for the zipper, to stitch the zipper. So let's measure it just to be safe. Yeah, I think I have 2 centimeters. So including the seam allowance, I'm just going to measure around 2.5 centimeters from the top, or maybe 3. Let's go down. So 3 centimeters. I'm not sure how much that's in inches. You can check. 2.5 centimeters. I think it's, I don't know, 1 inch and an 8.25. I'm not sure. you need to convert that by yourself. So here, this line again indicates the top edge of our slip pocket. So now we want to kind of draw our flap, the shape of our flap. Again, mark the placement of our snaps, and then we're going to divide this pattern into different sections. So pretty straightforward. So first, what I like to do is to decide how tall I want that flap. Again, similar to the connector, do you want it really tall? Do you want the flap to go like very down? So it would be like here, or do you want it really, really narrow? So it's more like this. Again, this is totally your preference. I think, let me measure it. Mine is about 5 centimeters, so that's 2 inches. So I'm going to stick with that. So 5 centimeters. So my ruler is 5 centimeters. So I'm going to draw a line that will indicate where my flap ends. And again, think about the seam allowance. So what I like to do is to draw the seam allowance on my pattern what I usually do is whenever I'm modifying things or I'm hacking patterns, I would print separate pieces and I would cut the seam allowance off. This makes more sense to me and kind of prevent me from making silly mistakes when I forget to add seam allowance, or I already have seam allowance and I add again another seam allowance on top of it. It can get a little bit confusing and frustrating when you are hacking and amending patterns. So that's why I always advise in any of my videos to do it without the seam allowance. But since I didn't today, because I wanted to make sure I give you that tip, I'm going to just draw the seam allowance. So that's 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to mark this on sides. So from this point, from here to here, this is the finished size of our pouch. Yeah, I made my flap slightly narrower then. So here, as you can see, is the side edge, and as you can see, my flap doesn't go entirely to the edge. I didn't want too much bulk here, and I didn't want the flap to kind of curve around. And whatever I'm going to put in this wallet is not going to fall out from this tiny opening here. So what I've done is I measured 1 centimeter from that seam allowance, and that is I'm going to draw the line actually completely, and that is the finished measurement for my flap. So here, this would be the finished measurement of my flap. So this is this portion here. So again, if you want, you can curve your corners you can, I don't know, make them like this. So if you want more of a square ones, or you can leave the square corner completely. Whatever you're going to do here, it is totally up to you. If you wanted just a square one here, or like a triangle on the connector, you could do that as well. Since I have corners on the pouch, I just wanted to have curved corners everywhere. I thought it's nice, it looks nice and kind of on theme. So yeah, so let's say this is my curved corner. If you want, you can also use the lining piece and just like copy corners. There's so many options you can you can do, but freehand is always nice as well. So again, if I wanted to copy this, I would take my tracing paper, trace it, then I can cut it. So you want to flip it like a mirror image and trace it on the other side. Obviously take your time and be precise. Don't rush like me, because it's not gonna look pretty. And we want our projects to look pretty after all. So in the same way, we've added some ease to our connector, just to allow that fabric for bending and for the thickness of your fabric, stabilizer, interfacing, whatever you're going to use. It's always best to add a little bit of ease. And then once you are constructing your pouch, you can always move your flap up and down depending on how you install your connector, your snaps, and how your fabric behaves. So this is what I'm going to do. So next, what you want is to mark the placement of your snaps. So let's see. I'm going to, if you want just one snap in the center, you can do that. Again, you would have to fold your paper to find that midpoint. But since I'm doing two connectors, I don't really have to worry about the midpoint right now. So I'm going to measure about 2 centimeters from the side edge of my flap, and I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to do that on the other side as well to be nice and symmetrical. And then let's see, how far do we want? I typically kind of play with it to see visually what I like. Since we have the corners here, you don't want to go too close. If you had a square one, then you could go to even here, because that would be the placement of your connector. But since we have the corner, I'm going to measure about 1.5 centimeter from the bottom edge. So that's 5/8 of an inch. So I measured 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch from the side of my flap, and then 1.5 centimeter, that's 5/8 of an inch from the bottom edge. So I'm going to circle it. This is how I like to indicate my snaps, my snap placement. So now we can trace this pattern on a separate piece of paper. So I'm not sure. No, I cannot see that through, so I'm going to use my tracing paper. Here, if you had tracing wheel, you could take paper and then you could just run it over on top to trace that pattern, and then use your pen to just draw that. But since I know not many of you have it, we can always trace it. Again, if you print it, you can also print 2 of them, let's say 2 pattern pieces, and then cut it out. But I didn't, so I'm going to trace it. as I would usually do. So let me just cut some extra. We don't need that much. And what I like to do is to use masking tape. So let me put this aside for a sec so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to place this on top. Make sure your paper is big enough, because later we need to add some seam allowance. So you want to make sure your paper is big enough. So I use masking tape just to hold those pieces in place. This will prevent the paper from shifting when I'm tracing it. So now we can start tracing. So I'm going to trace these sides and the bottom. You're going to trace your curves. Remember when I said we need to extend that? So what I'm going to do is to add 1 centimeter extra ease. So from this point, I'm not going to draw this line here. I'm going to take my ruler and measure 1 centimeter from that line and just draw extra. So this is the top of my flap with that ease. So next, make sure you trace your snap placement and mark your grain line. So here is that line with an arrow. We can mark that on our paper as well. So this is how you draft pattern piece for your flap. So next, I'm going to just stick that here so you can see. So next we need to add seam allowance. So again, I'm just going to add 1 centimeter seam allowance all around. If you worry that 1 centimeter is not enough, you can always add a little bit more. It's always best to add more, and then when you are sewing your project, you can always adjust it. So, you know, better that than later you know, end up having very tight fold. So I'm going to just add the seam allowance around the curves. Here we go. And as always, make sure you label your pattern. So this is flap. It's totally up to you if you want to cut it once from external and then once from lining, or 2 times from external. That's totally up to you. So I'm going to write cut 1 time external fabric and lining fabric. Here you go. Again, if you want to fuse some interfacing or maybe stabilizer, you can add that to your label as well. So you know exactly what you want to do. So now our flap is finished. Then you would simply cut it out, and this would be your complete pattern piece. If you want, you can mark your midpoints as well. So I'm going to just fold this in half to find my midpoint. Here we go. This will ensure that when you are constructing your pouch, you're going to center your flap. So every marking, any marking you can add to your pattern piece, it's best. The more you have on your pattern, it's going to be easier for you to understand what this pattern piece is for, especially, you know, after a while, if you haven't done the project for 1 year or 2 and you suddenly find this, you don't know what it is. At least this way you know exactly all those markings, what they mean, and you can, you know, do the same project over and over again. so I'm going to put this aside. You would cut it out, but I'm not going to bother today. So next, and this is the last portion, is we need to divide this in two different pattern pieces. So we've made so to make this back panel, what we need is the flap, which we already drafted. We need this top panel. This is going to be this panel here once we cut along this line. Then we have our slip pocket and the lining behind. Since we're going to cut this, and this is the size of our slip pocket, what we're going to do is to simply add seam allowance and relabel our pattern pieces. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. But first, let me extend that grain line. So I'm going to have a grain line. Then you're going to cut it. Let me just see if everyone understands what I'm doing. I think you are all good. So that's good. All right, so take your scissors and cut it along this line. And we're going to add seam allowance. So like we did on the front panel, you can just take some glue or tape, glue it on the back, and we're going to stick that on top. So again, I'm just going to mark where the edge of my paper is so you can see, and from that point I'm going to add 1 centimeter seam allowance. Square the side edges. Here we go. And we can cut this out. All right. So originally this was the back panel, but we cut our back panel in two different pieces. So now this is not back panel. I would name it differently. So I'm going to cross this over, and what this is our slip pocket. So this is slip pocket, which we need to cut 1 time from external fabric and then 1 time from our lining fabric. So cut 1 time external fabric plus 1 time lining fabric. And this pattern piece is also the lining, the back of our the back panel of our pouch, which now can be cut from lining fabric, because again this originally is cut from external fabric, but since we added the flap and this is behind the pocket, nobody sees it, we can just use lining fabric to reduce bulk at the seams. But again, if you want to use external fabric, just go for it. So I'm going to say that I need to cut 1 more lining fabric, so I'm going to change that for 2. So we're going to cut it 1 time from lining fabric, 1 time from external fabric, and 2 times from lining fabric, and this is going to be our slip pocket. You can name it back and then cut back 1 time, but that might be a little bit too messy on your pattern piece. So this is now done. Those placements, just as a side note, are important because you need to have them on your slip pocket. So you can make a note if you want, mark only on external slip pocket. As I said, more no annotations, more labels is best. So this is what I usually do when I amend my patterns. So this is now finished. And the last thing we need to do is to just add seam allowance to this little piece. That was the top portion. So that's why draw your grain line so you know exactly what it is. I'm going to call this top back panel. And we need to cut it one time from external fabric. Here we go. So let's add seam allowance. Are you following me? Is anyone actually doing it with me? Or are you just watching? Let me know in the comments. I'm very curious if you're following along. Let me know in the comments if you're actually planning to try this little hack. So now I'm going to add seam allowance. Let me just turn this way. So here is the edge of my paper, and that's 1 centimeter seam allowance. So now remember, always square off your sides. And you can cut it out. There we go. And that is all. So you've made a lot of mess. We've made two new complete pattern pieces. We've amended the front and the back panels to hack and amend this little zip-up card holder. So basically that's all I wanted to share with you today. This is the complete tutorial. This is exactly what I've done to create this sample here. And what I'm going to do is to create a short tutorial on how to actually assemble it, because I know sometimes when you are new to pattern amendments, or even you are new to sewing, might not know exactly when to stitch it. So what I'm going to do is to make separate tutorial. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments underneath this live video. I'm going to save this, so it's going to be on my channel. So in case if you were following me along but I was too fast, then you can always rewatch it, rewind the parts that maybe you didn't understand as much. So I'm just going to check if I have any questions. I want to make this as soon as possible. That's great, Bev. That makes me so happy. Oh my god, I cannot wait to see, you know, your version, guys. I know this is very popular pattern and everyone is always looking for especially for this connector. So I hope, you know, many people will find this tutorial and actually use it for many different patterns. So that's my goal. So great to hear. Always make sure to tag me so I can, you know, show you some love when I see your versions. Oh, Pamela, you did a fabulous job explaining this. Looking forward to making one later today. Oh, that's amazing as well. Oh, thank you very much, Pamela. Let me know if you would like more tutorials like this. I know my channel is more about sewing tutorials, and I've been dabbling in putting few of pattern drafting and hacking tutorials. I really enjoy it, and I think a lot of you will benefit from that, especially, you know, if you see how easy it is to just transform a pattern. So let me know again if you want to see more of that sort of videos from me, so I can always come and either record them and edit them so you don't have to sit with me for an hour and you can skip, or we can meet and chat like we did today. So yeah, so that basically is all from me. I don't want to keep you waiting. I hope to see you in the next live, and yeah, hit me on Instagram, Facebook, or here on YouTube, wherever you found me, wherever you are on social media. I would love to know what you thought, what I could improve, do better for next time. And yeah, I hope you are having a wonderful day and week. So without further ado, I'm going to leave you and I'm going to cook my partner a dinner now because he's coming home soon. So thank you very much. I'm going to leave you with my favorite saying as I always finish my videos. See you next time. Stay crafty, friends. Bye.